So, seeing as it is Friday the 13th where I am, I decided I was going to make a video talking about the most notable paranormal stuff I've witnessed in my almost 27 years of life. So I'm gonna start. When I was around 2 years old, I remember sitting or laying in my bed, and it was probably midnight, or it was late at night, I know that much. And I woke up because I thought somebody was staring at me. Now, I was a hard sleeper as a child, and I still somewhat am. So I assumed it was either my mom or my dad trying to wake me up for the day. But when I opened my eyes, I didn't see my parents. Instead, what I saw was a man who, he was, I guess, kind of thin built, and he had this nice, I would say, I guess, kind of formal type hat, and he was leaning over my bed. It felt like he was staring at me. And I'm sure this wasn't sleep paralysis because I could move. I remember picking the blanket up and putting it over my eyes and then lowering it because I was a toddler and I thought maybe if I hid from the monster, it would go away. But he didn't. He was still there. And I was freaking out. So, and this is the part that my parents can also back up, I started screaming at the top of my lungs and running from the end of the house that I lived in all the way to the other end where my parents and the dog were. And I'm hysterical, and I just remember telling them, there's a man in my room. There's a scary man in my room. Well, my dad gets up because, he's freaked out. But he goes in there and he says there's nobody in there. And I am hysterical, telling them, yes, there is. There's a man in my room. I don't want to sleep in there. After that, I did not sleep alone until I was about 13 years old because that really bothered me. I've never experienced it again, but around the time I saw this figure, one of my great uncles had died, and he had died from several complications. And while watching a video on YouTube one day, I found out the name of the being that I saw, and it was the Hat Man, which, while comical sounding, was one of the most terrifying experiences I think I will ever have in my life, because it's one of those things that I still have nightmares about from time to time. The next story happened when I was around 16, 17. Our neighbor had a dog, and I would sit outside and, mess with the dog until it got dark out. Well, and I've made another video talking about this. I'll probably put a link to that video in the description of this one or in the comments. I just happened to once again feel like, I was kind of being watched, and the dog was kind of looking at something. So I was like, oh, what does the dog see? A deer? I wish it had been a deer. Because when I looked over to where the dog was looking, it wasn't a deer. There was a thing. And that is the only way I can think to describe it. Because it was it looked like, this is going to sound very stupid, but like a 7-foot tall Jawa from Star Wars. Except it had red eyes and At first I was like, oh, it's the light from the neighbor's house. So I wanted, to get closer to make sure that's what it was. But when I started to get closer, I realized that the movement of it was not changing. The two lights, which I'm assuming were its eyes, were still at the same level I had seen them, but they were slowly moving towards me. So I told the dog, I think her name was Julia, but I ended up, for some reason, naming her Hannah, to go home. It's time to go home. And I ran inside the house, telling my dad, there's something outside. I need you to check this with me. So then my dad hands me a flashlight and goes, here, go check it out. And that was the first time in a very long time that I had prayed as hard as I had. Because I was genuinely terrified of this thing. And I'm lucky enough that it's, never returned. But I've always had that thought of, what was it? What did it want? Where did it come from? Because where I live, there was a cemetery not too far away from where my house and my grandmother's house sits. The area has been turned into a recreational lake, but it used to be farmland and there was a cemetery. So I don't know if it was something or someone from that cemetery who was just like, hey, what are you doing? Or, if that had been, if my yard had somehow been part of their land or something. The next story happened when I was 19, I would say. It was after my grandfather died, which completely destroyed me mentally. I'm still not quite over it, because he was like a father to me. Because my dad, while he is a good father, he just wasn't around a lot when I was little because he worked 2 jobs to provide for the family. So my grandpa was like my dad. Anyway, I was going to a therapist who, in hindsight, made things only worse for me. But at this therapist office is one of the older houses in the city of Carbondale, Illinois. And it is very close to a location known as the Hundley House, which is where a mayor and his wife were found murdered. Supposedly. Well, not the murder part, but that they were murdered by someone. I'm not going to get into it. Anyway, I'm sitting in this office, and I'm just kind of looking around because my therapist is talking to my mom. And I'm sitting there in this office, and all of a sudden I'm like, did I just see something move next to the staircase? Because it's an old 20s, 10s style house where it's got the stairwell basically right smack dab in the middle of the living room. And I'm like, I feel like something moved over by the stairwell. So I thought maybe, it was a fly or even the other lady that worked there. And I look over and I see a little face. It's a shadow, but it was a shadow in the sense that you could see features, but it was dull. Very, very dull. Kind of like an unlockable character in video games, is how I would describe her. And I say her because she was wearing a little, dress that came just below her knees. And she had 2 little pigtails that kind of looked like they were braided. And I remember kind of staring at her, and it felt like she was staring at me, and we're just kind of looking at each other. And then suddenly, she pokes her head back behind the stairwell, so I kind of smiled. And I just kept watching, and she poked her head back out again. And I'm still smiling at her, and it felt like she smiled at me. And when I went to wave at her, as fast as you could possibly think of something moving. She ran up the stairs and I never saw her again. But the part that made this funny was the lady who also worked here was a anthropologist, and she's walking down the stairs, and I said, "This is gonna sound weird, but have you ever seen anything like a ghost or anything here?" And this lady was real sweet, and she smiled at me, and she said, "Oh, you saw her too?" And I said, "Yeah." And she proceeds to tell me that, yeah, she's seen her a couple times, and she's never felt threatened by this spirit, so, she just lets it be. And it doesn't really bother anybody, and the most it does is what it did to me, which is kind of, peekaboo, hide and seek kind of things. And the last story, if I don't start crying, is, it was about 2016. I had a cat, a little small cat. There's a video of her also on my YouTube channel. Her name was Jordan. Jordan was my best friend from the time I was like 9.5 till I was 22. She was my best friend. Jordan had ran into something a long time ago, and we think it caused her to have small seizures or strokes. And one day when I came home, this was about a week before exactly a week before Halloween, I came home and I was like, "Dad, what's wrong with Jordan?" And he said, "Oh, I don't know. She just laid down. I thought she was just sleeping." So I go over there and I notice she can't stand. She's real shaky and she won't stand on her own. So I pick her up and I, of course, start crying because my cat is, something I can't help her with. 7 days later, it was really early in the morning. My mom comes in my room and she's crying and I'm, bleary, and she just tells me, "Honey, I think Jordan is dying." And that was the hardest thing, one of the hardest things that I had gone through, because this happened so close to the death of my grandfather. So we sat in the living room with her, and I sat near her because I had read somewhere that, cats know when they're going to die, and it's scary to them. Well, we waited a bit until, veterinarian offices open, because where we live there is not a 24-hour one very close. So we called one vet, and they told us to come in, but when we showed up, they kind of looked at us and said, "Well, we're not open yet." And I'm, hysterically crying, holding my cat in a blanket while she's dying, basically. And we stormed off because, we were both mad. So we came home, and then my grandmother suggested we take my cat, Jordan, to a different vet, one that had, put her dogs, down when they finally were, just too old to do anything or, move. So we did. And then that night, we had to hand out candy. So I'm half crying this whole Halloween night, dressed up like the White Rabbit, while my mom is the Queen of Hearts. And I am, I'm not looking forward to going home, because I know when I get home, I'm not going to have my friend. So we get done handing out candy. And, we get home, and it takes me a while to get to sleep. And it was probably about 1 in the morning. And I'm, getting ready to go to sleep. I'm just now getting comfortable, or just then getting comfortable. And I feel something jump on the bed. And at first I thought it was our other cat, Boots. So I was like, what are you doing in here? But I look, and there's nothing there. But I can see divots in my blanket in the bed moving towards me. So I kind of watched it, and it laid down next to me. And I knew that it was my cat, and she still does that from time to time. And that was one of the most comforting things I had happen to me since my grandpa died, was my cat coming back and sleeping next to me. And like I said, every now and then, I'll feel her lay next to me, and it makes me, feel good. It makes me happy that my cat is still with me. I'm so sorry, I'm crying. But yeah, those are the most notable things that I've experienced. Paranormal wise. Now my parents and my grandma both have, a couple more stories. But those are mine, and I feel kind of good that I've had these experiences, because to me it's comforting to know that, ghosts or, spirits of things can visit. And I've never felt threatened except for the Hat Man and whatever was in the yard. But the other ones I've never felt threatened by. And I consider myself very lucky, one, that they weren't anything malicious, and two, that I got to have those experiences, even the scary ones. So, that is my video, my fairly long video for Friday the 13th. Thank you for putting up with me rambling like a crazy person. It helps a lot when I know people probably won't judge me for these kind of things. So yeah, if you have any of your own interesting paranormal stories you want to talk about, you can leave them in the comments. I want everyone to be safe. And until then, I might make another video, get my grandma to talk. But yeah, until then, stay safe, love each other, and thanks for watching.